When my husband died, I thought the worst had already happened, but I never imagined our only son would look at me like an obstacle to be removed. He declared the entire $40 million was his. But when the lawyer opened the will, the truth left the entire room in stunned silence and set in motion the most bitter revenge of my life. My name is Margaret Hale, and at 72 years old, I never imagined I'd be telling this story. The morning David died, the autumn sun streamed through our bedroom windows just like it had for 40 years. But this time, it illuminated an empty space where my husband should have been. The lung cancer had taken him piece by piece over 18 months. I'd watched my strong, vibrant husband, the man who built Hale Construction from nothing into a $40 million empire, reduced to labored breaths and morphine drips. When his breathing finally stopped at 3:15 a.m. on that October morning, I felt like someone had carved out my chest and left it hollow. Our house in Westchester felt enormous without him. Every room echoed with memories. David's laughter in the kitchen as he made his famous Sunday pancakes, his footsteps on the stairs, the way he'd hum old jazz tunes in the shower. I wandered through our home like a ghost myself, unable to process that the man I'd loved for 43 years was gone. Andrew arrived for the funeral in his Tesla, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. My son, our only child, had inherited his father's sharp features but none of his warmth. At 42, he was successful in his own right, a hedge fund manager with a penthouse in Manhattan and a second wife half his age. "Mother," he said, pecking my cheek with all the emotion of someone greeting a business acquaintance. His cologne was overpowering, nothing like the subtle aftershave David had worn. During the service, I watched Andrew from my place in the front pew, while I sobbed into my handkerchief. He checked his phone repeatedly. When old friends shared stories about David's generosity and humor, Andrew's jaw tightened with impatience. He kept glancing at his Rolex, as if calculating how much this grief was costing him in billable hours. The moment we returned to the house after the burial, before the guests had even finished their catered sandwiches, Andrew cornered me in David's study. "We need to discuss the company's transition," he said, already settling into David's leather chair. "I've arranged meetings with the board for next week. The construction contracts need immediate attention." I stared at him, still in my black dress, my eyes swollen from crying. "Your father's been in the ground for 2 hours. Andrew." He shrugged, shuffling through papers on the desk. "Business doesn't stop for grief. Mother," Dad would understand. That was the first lie. David would have been appalled. He'd built his company on relationships, on treating people like family. He'd have been heartbroken to see our son reduce his life's work to spreadsheets and profit margins before his grave had even settled. "I need time," I said quietly. Andrew's eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite identify. Irritation? Calculation? Of course. "Take a few days, but decisions need to be made. I'll handle things until you're ready." He left that evening without staying for dinner, without asking if I needed anything, without a single word of comfort. As his taillights disappeared down our driveway, I stood alone in the doorway of the house David and I had filled with love, wondering when my baby boy had become this cold stranger. The darkness that settled over me that night wasn't just grief. It was the creeping realization that I hadn't just lost my husband. I'd lost my son, too, long before I'd even noticed he was gone. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks after the funeral. I was at the grocery store, reaching for David's favorite coffee, a habit I couldn't break, when my credit card was declined. Embarrassed. I tried another card, declined, then another. All declined. "I'm so sorry," I mumbled to the cashier, my face burning as the line behind me grew. I fumbled for cash, thanking God I had enough to cover the groceries. Back home, I called the credit card companies. Each one delivered the same message. The accounts had been closed by the primary account holder, Andrew. "There must be some mistake," I told the representative. My husband just passed away. Our son wouldn't. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am, but the closure was authorized yesterday at 2:47 p.m. My hands shook as I dialed Andrew's number. He answered on the fifth ring, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter in the background. Mother, I'm in a meeting. What is it? My credit cards aren't working. Oh, yes. I'm restructuring the family finances. It's for your own good. You don't need multiple cards at your age. Too confusing. Too confusing? I gripped the phone tighter. Andrew, I've managed this household for 4 decades. Things are different now, he said, his tone shifting to what I'm sure he thought was patient but came across as condescending. I'll set up an allowance for you. $5,000 a month should be more than enough for your needs. An allowance like I'm a child? Don't be dramatic. I have to go. The line went dead. $5,000 might sound like a lot, but our property taxes alone were nearly that much. The house maintenance, utilities, insurance. David had always ensured I never had to worry. Now my own son was treating me like a burden. 2 days later, Andrew arrived unannounced with a briefcase and a real estate agent. This is Sylvia, he said, gesturing to a blonde woman in a severe suit. She specializes in downsizing for seniors. I stood in my own foyer, speechless, as this stranger walked through my home, taking photos and making notes. Gorgeous property, Sylvia chirped. This will sell quickly. The market for estates is absolutely on fire right now. I'm not selling, I said firmly. Andrew sighed as if I were a petulant child. Mother, be realistic. This place is too big for one person. The maintenance costs are astronomical. A nice condo would be much more suitable. Your father built this house, I said, my voice cracking. We raised you here. Every holiday, every birthday. Memories don't pay bills, Andrew interrupted. The house is worth at least $8 million. That money could be better invested. Invested where? In your hedge fund? His face darkened. I'm trying to help you. Dad left me in charge for a reason. He left you in charge? The words hit me like a physical blow. What exactly did he leave you in charge of? Everything, Andrew said smoothly. Too smoothly. The company, the assets, ensuring you're taken care of, which is what I'm doing. Sylvia sensed the tension and excused herself to examine the gardens. Andrew and I stood facing each other in the hallway where he'd taken his first steps. I want you to leave, I said quietly. Mother. Now, Andrew. He picked up his briefcase, shaking his head. You're being irrational. Grief makes people do foolish things. When you're ready to be sensible, call me. After they left, I walked through my house, seeing it through different eyes. The family photos Andrew had barely glanced at. The kitchen where I'd taught him to bake cookies. The treehouse David had built for him, still visible through the back window. When had my son become someone who could walk through these rooms and see only dollar signs? That night, I found myself in David's study, searching through his files. There had to be something, some document that explained what Andrew meant, but the important papers, the will, the business documents, were all with the lawyers. Andrew's lawyers, I realized with growing dread. I sat in David's chair, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne that still clung to the leather, and made a decision. If my son wanted to treat me like a helpless old woman, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. The knock on my door came at 8:30 a.m. The next morning, Ruby Dawson stood on my porch with a casserole dish and eyes full of concern. We'd been neighbors for 20 years, and she'd watched Andrew grow from a sweet boy into whatever he'd become. Margaret, honey, I saw that real estate woman snooping around yesterday, Ruby said, settling into my kitchen like she belonged there. What's going on? I found myself pouring out everything. The credit cards, the allowance, Andrew's coldness. Ruby listened, her face growing darker with each revelation. That boy, she muttered, shaking her head. David would be rolling in his grave. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Andrew says David left him in charge of everything, but David would never. We always made decisions together. Ruby leaned forward. Have you seen the will? No. Andrew says his lawyers have it. He keeps saying he'll show it to me when things settle down. Margaret Hale, you listen to me, Ruby said firmly. My cousin went through something similar when her husband died. Her stepson tried to push her out of everything. You need your own lawyer, today. But Andrew said, Andrew isn't looking out for you, Ruby interrupted. When has he visited since David got sick? When has he called just to check on you? That boy is looking out for himself. The truth of her words stung because I'd been avoiding it during David's illness. Andrew had been conspicuously absent. Business trips, important meetings, always an excuse. He'd shown up for the end, yes, but only after the doctors said it would be days, not weeks. Ruby pulled out her phone. Philip Grant, best estate lawyer in Westchester County. He handled my cousin's case. The man is brilliant and, more importantly, he doesn't let anyone push around widows. An hour later, I sat in Philip Grant's office, feeling like I was betraying my own son. Philip was in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office walls were covered with degrees and family photos. A man who understood both law and love. Mrs. Hale, he said after I'd explained the situation, in 40 years of practice, I've seen this scenario too many times. The fact that your son has held the will for 3 months without sharing it with you is, frankly, alarming. 3 months is a long time? It's highly unusual. New York law requires the will to be filed with the surrogate's court within a reasonable time. More concerning is his claim that he's in charge without showing you documentation. He's my son, I said weakly. I want to trust him. Philip's expression softened. I understand, but trust should be paired with transparency. Your husband built a significant estate. You have every right to know its disposition. He pulled out a legal pad. Tell me about your marriage. Did you and David typically make financial decisions together? Always, I said, tears threatening. David insisted I understand everything about the business, our investments. He used to say, Maggie, if anything happens to me, you need to know where every penny is. That's the David Hale I remember from the Chamber of Commerce. Philip nodded. A man like that doesn't suddenly decide to cut his wife out of the equation. So what do I do? First, I'll file a petition with the surrogate's court requesting immediate disclosure of the will. If Andrew is the executor, he has legal obligations he must fulfill. Second, I'll request a full accounting of all estate assets. Won't that make things worse between us? Philip looked at me over his glasses. Mrs. Hale, your son has already damaged your relationship by treating you like an obstacle rather than his mother. My job is to ensure you're not left homeless and penniless on top of grieving. I signed the papers with a heavy heart but steady hands. As I left his office, Philip called after me. Margaret, you're doing the right thing. David would be proud. Driving home, I passed the cemetery where David lay. I found myself pulling in, walking to his grave with its fresh sod and temporary marker. I'm scared, David, I whispered to the silent stone. Our boy. What happened to our boy? The wind rustled through the oaks overhead, and for a moment, I could almost hear David's voice. Fight, Maggie, don't let anyone, not even our son. Take what we built together. I squared my shoulders and walked back to my car. If Andrew wanted a battle, he was about to learn that his mother wasn't the weak old woman he thought she was. I'd stood by David's side building an empire. I wasn't about to let our son tear it down out of greed. The law offices of Brennan, Cole, and Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming building in White Plains. 2 weeks after hiring Philip, we finally had our day of reckoning. The conference room smelled of leather and old money, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson Valley. Andrew arrived 15 minutes late with his lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Richard Brennan. My son wore his armor, a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most cars, and didn't meet my eyes as he sat across the mahogany table. Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Brennan said, pulling out a folder. My client has been more than patient with Mrs. Hale's demands. Philip smiled thinly. Your client has been legally obligated to produce this will for 3 months. Patience isn't the word I'd use. Mother? Andrew finally looked at me, his expression one of practiced disappointment. This is unnecessary. I've been protecting your interests. By cutting off my credit cards? By trying to sell my home? By ensuring the estate is properly managed, he said smoothly. Dad's fortune is substantial. $40 million requires professional oversight. Then let's see what David actually wanted. Philip interjected. Mr. Brennan? Brennan made a show of opening the folder slowly, as if this were all a tedious formality. The last will and testament of David Samuel Hale, executed 14 months ago. 14 months ago, when David first got his diagnosis, my throat tightened. Brennan began reading in a monotone voice, rushing through the legal preamble. Then he reached the distributions, and I watched Andrew's face carefully. To my beloved wife, Margaret Rose Hale, I leave our primary residence and all its contents, plus a monthly allowance of— Skip to the relevant parts, Andrew interrupted. Philip's eyes sharpened. Every part concerning Mrs. Hale is relevant. Continue, counselor. Brennan's jaw tightened, but he continued. As he read, the room's atmosphere shifted like air before a storm. The will was clear. Andrew would inherit the construction company and the bulk of the financial assets, but with one crucial condition. He was to ensure I lived comfortably for the rest of my life, maintaining my standard of living, with full access to funds as needed. Furthermore, Brennan read, his voice becoming strained, should my son fail to honor this responsibility, the following redistribution will take effect immediately. Andrew's face went white. 50% of all assets will transfer to Margaret Hale. 40% of Hale Construction, including controlling interest, will transfer to Noel Carter. That's enough, Andrew snapped. No, I said quietly. Keep reading. Brennan looked at Andrew, who gave a sharp nod. The remaining 10% will be donated to the Westchester Children's Foundation. This redistribution is triggered by any attempt to reduce Margaret Hale's access to marital assets, force the sale of her residence against her wishes, or otherwise diminish her quality of life. The silence that followed was deafening. There's more, Brennan said reluctantly. David Hale specifically notes, I know my son. His ambition sometimes clouds his judgment. This provision ensures he remembers that family comes before fortune. I had to press my hand to my mouth to stifle a sob. Even facing death, David had tried to protect me and to teach our son one final lesson. This is ridiculous, Andrew burst out. Noel Carter? He's just Dad's drinking buddy. This will won't hold up. Dad was sick, probably medicated. Your father was completely lucid, a new voice said from the doorway. We all turned. Noel Carter stood there, tall and dignified in a simple gray suit, David's best friend since college, the man who'd helped build the company from nothing. I was there when he signed it, Noel continued, entering the room. So was Dr. Morrison, who can testify to David's mental clarity. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. Andrew stood abruptly. You set this up. You poisoned him against me. Sit down, Andrew, I said, finding my voice. You poisoned that well yourself. $40 million, Andrew said, his carefully constructed facade cracking. I worked for that company. You deserve what your father left you, Philip interrupted, which is substantial, if you honor the conditions. Conditions, Andrew spat the word. Babysitting an old woman who can't let go of the past. The words hung in the air like a slap. Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath. An old woman, I repeated slowly. Is that all I am to you? Andrew's mouth opened, then closed. For just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. You've already violated the conditions, Philip said calmly. The credit cards, the attempt to sell the house. We have documentation. You have nothing, Brennan interjected, but his voice lacked conviction. Philip smiled and pulled out his own folder. Credit card companies keep excellent records. Real estate agents remember conversations. Your client has been quite busy these past weeks. I watch my son's face cycle through emotions, anger, disbelief, and finally, rage. "Fine," Andrew said, his voice deadly quiet. "You want to fight, Mother? You'll get one. I'll see you in court." He stormed out, Brennan scrambling to follow. The door slammed with a finality that echoed in my chest. Noel moved to sit beside me, his presence comforting. "David worried this would happen," he said gently, "but he hoped Andrew would make the right choice." "He chose money over his mother," I whispered. "No, Margaret," Noel corrected. "He chose greed over love, and now he'll lose both." The character assassination began 3 days later. I was picking up milk at our local market when I noticed the whispers. Mrs. Patterson, whose daughter I taught piano to years ago, actually turned away when she saw me. By the time I reached the checkout, I felt like I had a scarlet letter branded on my chest. "Did you hear?" the cashier murmured to her colleague, not quite quietly enough. "Her son says she manipulated her dying husband, changed the will when he was too sick to think straight." I left without the milk. At home, my answering machine blinked with messages. Most were hang-ups, but one made my blood run cold. "Margaret, it's Helen from the garden club. I think perhaps you should skip next week's meeting, just until things blow over." 20 years in that garden club, 20 years of fundraisers and flower shows. And now I was persona non grata because of my son's lies. The doorbell rang at 6:15 p.m. Ruby stood on my porch with a bottle of wine and fury in her eyes. "That boy of yours is spreading poison all over town," she said, marching into my kitchen. "Tell me you're fighting back." "With what?" I sank into a chair. "He's telling everyone I'm a gold digger who took advantage of a dying man. People I've known for decades are believing it." "Then remind them who you really are," Ruby said firmly, "and who he is." Over the next week, Andrew's campaign intensified. He gave an interview to the local paper, painting himself as the devoted son trying to protect his father's legacy from a grasping second wife. The fact that I was his mother, not a stepmother, seemed to get lost in his narrative. He posted on social media about elder abuse, about how vulnerable seniors could be manipulated. He never named me directly, but everyone knew. Comments poured in supporting him, calling me terrible names, suggesting I should be investigated. Then came the legal filing. Philip called me at 7 a.m., his voice grim. "Andrew's filed a competency challenge," he said. "He's claiming David wasn't mentally sound when he made the will." But Noel said, "I know. We have Dr. Morrison's records, Noel's testimony, but Andrew's hired experts to review the medical files. He's going to drag this through the mud." I stared at my coffee, watching the cream swirl like my thoughts. "He's trying to break me." "Are you broken?" "No," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "No, I'm not." "Good, because I have news. Remember those credit card records we pulled? Andrew used the company card for some interesting purchases, trips to Vegas, jewelry that I'm guessing wasn't for you, entertainment expenses that would make a sultan blush." "David always suspected," I murmured. "He'd ask Andrew about discrepancies, and Andrew always had explanations?" "Well, he'll need explanations for the judge. This shows a pattern of financial manipulation long before David got sick." That afternoon, I made a decision. If Andrew wanted to play dirty, I'd show him where he learned it. I called 3 people: David's former secretary who'd retired 5 years ago, the accountant who'd helped build the company, and Father Michael from our church. Each of them had stories. The secretary remembered Andrew screaming at David for not promoting him fast enough. The accountant had emails where Andrew suggested creative bookkeeping. Father Michael had the most damning story of all. "David came to me 2 years ago," the priest said carefully. He was struggling with whether to cut Andrew out of the will entirely. He discovered Andrew had been telling potential clients that David was losing it, trying to position himself for a takeover. "Why didn't David tell me?" "He wanted to protect you. He hoped Andrew would change. That night, I sat in David's study, surrounded by photo albums, pictures of Andrew as a baby, his first day of school, teaching him to ride a bike. When had that golden-haired boy become a man who could destroy his mother for money? My phone rang, Andrew's number. "Enjoying your social exile, mother?" His voice was cold, slightly slurred. "This can all stop. Sign over your claims to the estate, take the condo I've selected, and I'll make sure everyone knows it was a misunderstanding." "You're drunk." "I'm celebrating. Brennan says the competency challenge is solid. Dad was on morphine, confused. No judge will uphold that vindictive will." "Vindictive?" I laughed bitterly. "Your father loved you despite everything. That will was his last attempt to save you from yourself." "Save me?" "He wanted to control me from beyond the grave, just like you both always did." "We wanted you to be a good man." "Good men don't get $40 million. Andrew snarled. "They get stepped on. I'm done being the good son. You have 1 week to accept my offer, or I'll bury you so deep in legal fees and public shame that you'll beg me for that condo." He hung up. I sat holding the dead phone, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. My son hadn't just crossed a line, he'd obliterated it. If he wanted war, war was what he'd get. The months that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Andrew's legal team filed motion after motion, each designed to drain my resources and my will. They demanded medical records, financial statements going back decades, even tried to subpoena my friends as character witnesses. I spent my days in Philip's office or in depositions, reliving every moment of my marriage under hostile questioning. "Mrs. Hale, isn't it true you convinced your husband to change his will when he was heavily medicated?" "No." "You never discussed the will during his illness?" "David wanted to ensure I was protected. We discussed it many times over the years." "But the timing," I interrupted, "was because my husband knew he was dying and wanted his affairs in order, something his son should have respected." Brennan smirked. "Speaking of respect, why would a son who respected his father try to undermine him?" That's when Philip played our first card. "I'd like to submit Exhibit A," Philip said calmly. "Email exchanges between Andrew Hale and several board members of Hale Construction, dated 2 years before David Hale's diagnosis." Brennan's smirk faltered. I watched him read Andrew's own words. "The old man is past his prime. When I'm in charge, we'll see real profits. Just need to wait him out." "Exhibit B," Philip continued. "Security footage from Hale Construction offices showing Andrew removing boxes of financial documents 3 days after David Hale's death, before the will was read. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Andrew loading bankers' boxes into his Tesla at 2:30 a.m. My client was securing company property," Brennan said weakly. "Without authorization from the estate executor?" Philip raised an eyebrow. "Interesting interpretation of corporate law. We had more, so much more. The testimony from David's nurses, who confirmed he'd been lucid until the final days. Bank records showing Andrew had been siphoning money through expense accounts for years. The real estate agent, Sylvia, who admitted under oath that Andrew had contacted her before David's death about listing our house. But the killing blow came from an unexpected source. "I'd like to call our next witness," Philip announced. "Dr. Janet Morrison." David's oncologist walked in, a small woman with steel in her spine. She'd been with us through every treatment, every hope and setback. "Dr. Morrison," Philip began, "were you present when David Hale finalized his will?" "I was. He asked me to be there specifically to verify his mental state." "And what was that state?" "Crystal clear. David was meticulous about timing. He wanted to complete the will while he was still sharp, before the late-stage medications might cloud his judgment." "Did he discuss his reasoning?" "Doctor," Morrison looked directly at Andrew. "He did. He said, 'Janet, I'm trying to save my son from his own greed. This will might make him hate me, but maybe it'll make him remember what matters.'" Andrew's face was carved from stone. "There's one more thing." "Doctor," Morrison added, David recorded a video that day. He asked me to keep it in case this happened. The courtroom erupted. Brennan objected frantically, but the judge allowed it. Philip produced a tablet, and suddenly, David filled the screen. My husband, thin but alert, sitting in his study, the same chair where Andrew had dismissed his legacy. "If you're watching this," David said, his voice strong despite the circumstances, "then things have gone as I feared. Andrew, son, I love you. But I've watched you become someone I don't recognize, someone who values money over morals, profit over people." I pressed my handkerchief to my mouth, tears streaming. "Margaret," David continued, "you've been my partner, my best friend, my true north for over 40 years. I won't let anyone, not even our son, dishonor that. The will stands as written. If Andrew chooses money over his mother, then he's already lost everything that matters." The video ended. The courtroom was silent except for my quiet sobs. When I looked at Andrew, I expected rage. Instead, I saw something worse: emptiness. As if the father he'd been fighting was suddenly real again, and the weight of it had crushed something inside him. "Your Honor," Brennan said after a long pause, "we need to recess to consult with our client." But Andrew stood up. "No." "Andrew," Brennan warned. "No," Andrew repeated. He looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw my little boy, the one who used to climb into our bed during thunderstorms. Then it was gone, replaced by bitter resignation. "We'll proceed to closing arguments," the judge said. As Philip stood to deliver our final statement, I knew we'd won, but watching my son sit defeated across the courtroom, I wondered if anyone really won when a family destroyed itself over money. The war was almost over, but the casualties were mounting, and the worst was yet to come. The judge's gavel fell like thunder. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that David Hale was of sound mind when executing his will. Furthermore, Andrew Hale has demonstrably violated the conditions set forth in said will through deliberate actions to restrict his mother's access to financial resources and attempts to force the sale of her residence. I gripped Philip's hand as the judge continued. "Therefore, the redistribution clause is hereby activated. 50% of the estate transfers to Margaret Hale, 40% of Hale Construction, including controlling interest, transfers to Noel Carter. The remaining 10% is awarded to the Westchester Children's Foundation." The courtroom exploded. Andrew shot to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "This is theft," he screamed. $40 million. That money is mine. The company is mine. "Mr. Hale, control yourself," the judge warned. But Andrew was beyond control. He turned to me, his eyes wild. "You did this. You poisoned him against me. You couldn't stand that he loved the company more than you." "He loved you more than any company," I said quietly, standing to face him. "But you couldn't see past the dollar signs to understand that." "Don't you dare," Andrew snarled. Starting toward me, court officers moved to intervene, but I held up my hand. "I'm your mother, Andrew. I changed your diapers, taught you to tie your shoes, sat up with you through chicken pox and heartbreaks, and you threw it all away for money that was already going to be yours. Spare me the martyrdom," he spat. "You got what you wanted. You won." "Won?" I laughed bitterly. "I lost my husband and my son. What exactly did I win?" "You're not my mother," Andrew said, his voice deadly cold. "My mother died when Dad did. You're just the woman who stole my inheritance." The words hung in the air like a blade. Around us, people gasped. Even Brennan looked uncomfortable. I straightened my spine, channeling every ounce of dignity I possessed. "No, Andrew, I'm the woman who gave birth to you, who loved you unconditionally, who would have given you everything if you'd just asked. But you didn't want a mother. You wanted a victim." I stepped closer, close enough to see the boy I'd raised warring with the man he'd become. "Your father left you millions," I continued. "Enough for 10 lifetimes, but it wasn't enough, was it? because it came with the condition that you treat me with basic human decency, and that price was too high for you to pay. You manipulative. I'm done. I cut him off. You want to hate me? Hate me. You want to blame me for your choices? Go ahead. But know this, every dollar you lost, you threw away yourself. Every relationship you destroyed, you burned down with your own greed. Andrew's jaw worked furiously. I'll appeal. I'll fight this until... Until what? I asked. Until you've spent your remaining inheritance on legal fees? Until everyone in Westchester knows what kind of man you really are? Oh wait, they already do, thanks to your smear campaign that backfired so spectacularly. Mrs. Hale, the judge interjected. While I understand emotions are high, perhaps... I'm almost finished, Your Honor. I said, I need to say this. I looked at my son one last time. David's will wasn't a punishment. Andrew, it was a life preserver. He was trying to save you from drowning in your own greed, but you had to want to be saved, and you chose to sink instead. Get out of my way, Andrew growled, pushing past me toward the exit. Andrew, I called after him. He stopped but didn't turn. Despite everything, I love you. I'll always love the boy you were, and if you ever find him again, my door is open. He laughed, harsh and bitter. Your door? You mean my family's door? In my father's house? Enjoy it while it lasts. Margaret, this isn't over. He stormed out, Brennan hurrying after him. The courtroom slowly emptied until only Philip, Noel, and I remained. You did the right thing, Noel said gently. Did I? I sank into a chair. I just publicly destroyed my own son. No, Philip corrected. You publicly stood up to someone who happened to be your son. There's a difference. He'll never forgive me. Maybe not, Noel agreed. But David would be proud. You fought for what was right, even when it broke your heart. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I didn't speak to them. What was there to say? That I'd won a fortune and lost my child? That justice tasted like ashes in my mouth? Ruby waited by my car, tears streaming down her face. Oh, honey, she said, pulling me into a hug. Take me home, and I whispered. As Ruby drove, I stared out the window at the town I'd called home for 40 years. The same streets, the same houses. But everything felt different. I was no longer David's wife or Andrew's mother. I was just Margaret Hale, a woman who'd fought for her dignity and paid with her family. The revenge was complete. The money was mine. The house was secure. And I had never felt more alone. The rain started as we left the courthouse. Gentle at first, then steadier. Fitting weather for the death of a family. Ruby stayed with me that first night, making tea I didn't drink and food I didn't eat. The house felt cavernous, echoing with ghosts, David's laughter, Andrew's childhood footsteps, the family we'd once been. 3 weeks passed. The legal documents were signed, the assets transferred. Noel took control of Hale Construction with the gravity it deserved, promising to honor David's legacy, the employees, many of whom had watched Andrew's behavior with growing concern, seemed relieved. I received a single text from Andrew. I hope you're satisfied. I wasn't. How could I be? I'd won everything and lost everything in the same breath. On a gray Thursday morning, I stood in David's study, now officially mine alone, sorting through papers. My hands trembled as I found a letter in David's handwriting, dated just a week before he died. My dearest Maggie, and it read, if you're reading this among legal papers, then our worst fears have come true. Know that every provision I made was to protect you, not punish Andrew. I pray he'll choose love over money, but if he doesn't, promise me you'll choose yourself. Don't let guilt destroy you. You deserve every penny, every protection. You gave me 43 years of joy. Let me give you security in return. All my love, David. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed for the husband who loved me enough to protect me from our own son, for the boy Andrew had been, for the man he'd chosen not to become. That afternoon, I met with Noel at the company offices. Employees who'd avoided me during the scandal now approached with apologies and support. David's legacy would continue, just not through his son. "There's something else," Noel said, leading me to David's old office. "Andrew left this." On the desk sat a photo, the three of us at Andrew's college graduation. We looked so happy, so complete. A sticky note was attached. "This is what you destroyed." "He's wrong," I said firmly. "He destroyed it himself." As I walked through town over the following weeks, the whispers faded. The truth had won. But truth is often a cold comfort. Some people apologized for believing Andrew's lies. Others simply nodded respectfully and kept their distance. I'd become something between a victim and a victor, a woman who'd fought her own son and won. Ruby convinced me to return to the garden club. "Hold your head high," she said. "You've got nothing to be ashamed of." She was right. I walked into that meeting, past the stairs and hushed conversations, and took my usual seat. Helen, who'd suggested I stay away, couldn't meet my eyes. But others, women who'd faced their own battles, nodded in solidarity. Standing in my garden now, 6 months after that courtroom showdown, I tend the roses David planted for our anniversary. They bloom despite neglect, resilient and beautiful, like me, perhaps, or like the love David and I shared, strong enough to survive even this. I'm 73 years old. I have more money than I could spend in 5 lifetimes, a house full of memories, and a son who won't speak to me. Some would call this revenge successful. I call it necessary. Andrew made his choice. He chose greed over love, money over mother. The will didn't destroy our relationship. It simply revealed what was already broken. David knew our son better than I wanted to admit. Sometimes I dream Andrew will show up at my door, not for money, but for forgiveness, that he'll realize what he lost was worth more than any inheritance. But dreams are just that, dreams. I've donated millions to charity in David's name. I've ensured Hale Construction treats its workers like family. I've lived with dignity despite the pain. That's my true revenge, not taking the money, but using it the way David would have wanted. The rain has stopped now. Sun breaks through the clouds, illuminating the garden where 3 sets of handprints once marked fresh concrete. Mother, father, and son. The concrete remains, but 1 set of hands will never touch mine again. I survived. I fought. I won. But Lord, at what cost? As I stand here in my empty victory, I understand that some prices are too high to pay. My son said I wasn't his mother anymore. Perhaps he's right. I'm not the mother who enabled his greed or excused his cruelty. I'm the mother who loved him enough to stop him from destroying everything his father built. And that, I suppose, will have to be enough. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm curious to know where you're hearing this. Are you driving to work, relaxing at home, or perhaps taking a walk? Please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective on family forgiveness and whether you think I made the right choice. Your stories matter too, and I'm here to listen.